Well, it's been days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Now, authorities are asking neighbors to check their home security cameras for a specific time frame of footage days before her abduction. The latest evidence confirms something thousands have suspected since the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie 78 days ago. That Nancy was targeted, and before the kidnapping happened on February 1st, her abductor was in her neighborhood 8 days earlier, January 24th, confirmed live by one of NY's own neighbors. But there is more. And the details coming to light about what happened in the weeks before Nancy was taken paint a picture that is far more deliberate, far more chilling, and far more traceable than the abductor ever intended. Before anything else, a moment to recognize Brian Entin. For 42 consecutive days, this NewsNation senior national correspondent planted himself in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood and refused to leave. He knocked on doors. He built relationships with residents. He returned to sources again and again. He was there longer than he had stayed in any one place for any story in his career. Longer than Idaho, longer than Gabby Petito. He was still calling those neighbors from Florida when he finally went home for a break on day 44. The January 24th disclosure exists because Brian Entin was physically present in that neighborhood long enough for a resident named Laura to trust him with what investigators had shared with her. Journalists who stay get the story. Brian stayed, and what he brought back from that neighborhood changes how this case must be understood going forward. Anand said it himself. It was the longest he had ever stayed in one place for a story. I was in Arizona for 42 days, which I can't believe. I think it's the longest I've ever been away from home before. I mean, I travel every week for stories pretty much, but I don't think I've ever stayed 42 days in one place nonstop. That kind of sustained presence is what produces the kind of source relationship that leads a neighbor to confirm a new investigative date to a journalist rather than just answering a front door question and closing up. Laura knew Entin. She had seen him in the neighborhood over weeks. She trusted him enough to share what agents had asked her about. The January 24th disclosure came from a foundation of consistent presence and earned trust, not from a single visit and a notepad. That context matters for understanding the quality of the information unreported, because it came from a neighbor who had been visited by the FBI 3 separate times and who understood the significance of what she was sharing. Laura is a neighbor who has lived in the Catalina Foothills community for more than a decade. She knows the area, knows the residents, and has been cooperating with investigators since the earliest days of the investigation. By the time she sat down with Entin on day 44, FBI agents had visited her home 3 separate times. Puma County Sheriff's deputies had been twice. The most recent FBI visit had been the previous Friday. On that visit, agents did something specific. They asked her about January 24th. They sat with her for approximately 25 minutes and went through her camera system together, looking for footage from that particular date. Her cameras from January 24th captured only wildlife. No person, no vehicle, nothing that could contribute to the investigation. But that outcome does not diminish the significance of the question being asked. The FBI sat with a neighbor for 25 minutes searching a specific date 8 days before the abduction. That is not what investigators do when they are guessing. That is what they do when they already know something happened on that date, and they are filling in the visual record from every available source in the neighborhood. The 25-minute duration of the camera review session also tells you something about what the agents were looking for and how they were looking for it. A brief check of available footage from a vague time window takes minutes. 25 minutes of sitting with a neighbor and going through specific dates together suggests agents were helping Laura navigate her camera system in a way that would surface footage she might not have known how to access on her own. Some home security systems archive differently. Some cameras overwrite on a rolling basis. Agents who understand those systems, and who had a specific date and time window in mind, were making sure the review was conducted correctly, not just accepting whatever Laura could find at the surface level. That thoroughness reflects an investigation that does not want to miss footage from January 24th because a neighbor did not know how to retrieve it properly. The thoroughness of that process matters because the investigation is building its timeline of those Saturday nights not just from the cameras that produced footage, but from the confirmed absences of footage that forced the visual record to be reconstructed from every available angle. What made Entin's ears sharpen the moment Laura said January 24th was a detail he noticed immediately. January 11th is a Saturday. January 24th is a Saturday. January 31st, the night of the abduction, is a Saturday. Every date of confirmed or suspected investigative significance in the weeks before February 1st falls on a weekend. Entin flagged it in real time during his podcast, raising the possibility that investigators believed the suspect was someone who worked during the week and came to the Catalina Foothills neighborhood on Saturday specifically. He did not know the answer. The expert analysis that followed his disclosure confirmed the theory. The absence of weekday dates from the investigation's specific follow-up canvas is itself informative. The blanket request covered January 1st through February 2nd, a full month. Within that month, specific dates became targets for active follow-up. Those targets are Saturdays. If the evidence pointed to a weekday visit, investigators would be asking about a weekday. They are asking about Saturdays. The evidence drives the inquiry. The inquiry is pointing at Saturdays. That is the clearest public signal in the case that the suspect's operational calendar was constrained to weekends and that the investigation knows it. That immediate recognition is what gave the Saturday pattern its investigative weight. It was not something analysts had to construct after the fact. It was visible the moment 3 Saturday dates appeared in the same case. C.C. Moore, the genetic genealogist who has contributed analysis to this investigation's public record, was direct about what the Saturday pattern means. She said the person casing the home likely had a weekday job and only had time on weekends. She added that the FBI almost certainly had footage or evidence that led them to believe the property was surveilled weeks before February 1st. The Saturday pattern is not a coincidence. It is a schedule. 3 Saturdays, 3 visits, 1 abduction on the 3rd. This was a person operating inside a fixed weekly window, one that restricted his ability to travel to Tucson or move through the neighborhood freely to the days when his primary obligations did not constrain him. The weekday job theory also carries implications for the investigation's geographic scope that the billboard placements underscore. A person who worked Monday through Friday somewhere outside of Tucson and drove to the Catalina foothills specifically on Saturdays is not a local suspect in the traditional sense. He would be someone with a connection to Tucson, personal knowledge of the area, knowledge of who Nancy Guthrie was, and where she lived. Combined with a base of operations far enough away that Saturday was the only day his schedule permitted a significant drive. The billboards going up in Houston and Southern California reflect investigative awareness that the suspect's home base may be in one of those regions. Electronic billboards in those locations are not placed without a reason. And the reason is typically that investigators have some basis for believing the person they are looking for has a presence in those areas. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell gave the most operationally specific public assessment of what Saturday reconnaissance means when she addressed it on Brian Anton's podcast on March 19th. She said, "If I am doing an operation on a Saturday night, I do dry runs on Saturday nights. I want to know what it is like." Both of those days, January 11th and the 24th, are both on weekends. What stands out to you there? Well, if I'm doing an op and I'm going to do it on a Saturday night, then I'm going to do dry runs on Saturday nights. I want to know what it's like. What lights are on? Is she generally home? Does she stay up late? Is she watching TV? She described the intelligence those dry runs produce, which lights are on at that hour, whether the target stays up late, how the neighborhood behaves at 1 o'clock a.m., whether anyone notices a stranger moving through the area after dark. Her conclusion was unambiguous. They were casing the place and doing a dry run for a Saturday evening hit. What O'Connell was describing is not amateur criminality, it is operational discipline applied to a residential target. The suspect did not arrive on February 1st and figure it out as he went. He had been to the property before, he had tested the environment, he had verified that his approach would go undetected. And then he came back a third time on the night he had prepared for and executed exactly what he had rehearsed. The operational preparation O'Connell described also explains the physical confidence visible in the doorbell footage. Analysts and behavioral experts who reviewed the footage noted that the suspect approached without hesitation, went directly to the camera, and handled the tampering with it in a way that reflected familiarity with its position and its coverage angle. That is not the behavior of someone encountering a security camera for the first time in a high-stress situation. That is the behavior of someone who has studied a specific camera, knows where it is mounted, knows the angle it covers, and has already thought through how to deal with it. The January 11th and January 24th visits are the moments when that study would have occurred. By February 1st, the camera was not a surprise. It was an item on a prepared checklist. Todd Shipley, a digital cybercrime expert and former Reno detective, drew out the identity-narrowing significance of this pattern in terms that the public can act on. He said it is a big deal. We are looking at January 11th, January 24th, and January 31st, and February 1st. This narrows down the identity of the suspect. People can think back, where was a specific person on these dates? Why was he out late those nights? The Saturday pattern gives anyone who knew the suspect during January 2026 a specific question to ask about his behavior. A friend who noticed he was unavailable on those specific Saturday evenings. A partner or roommate who observed him leave late and come back. A coworker whose social plans were declined on those weekends. The pattern is narrow enough to trigger memory in people who have specific information they may not have connected to this case until now. The Saturday pattern also sharpens the investigation's lead generation in a direction that is specific to people who knew the suspect during January 2026. A general description of a masked suspect of average build tells very little to someone who might know the perpetrator. A behavioral pattern of unexplained Saturday absences in January 2026, possibly involving travel to or through the Tucson area, is the kind of thing a partner, friend, or colleague might recognize from their own observations during that month. People who hold that information may not have connected it to this case because they did not know these 3 dates were significant. The investigation has now placed those dates in the public record. Someone who remembers where a specific person was on those 3 Saturdays may be holding the lead that the reward was designed to draw out. Like this video and subscribe right now. Because what the FBI has been building around these 3 Saturday dates goes significantly beyond a neighborhood footage request. And the investigative trajectory it reveals is not what a stalled investigation looks like. It is what a quiet one does. The investigation's public silence between press conferences is also something that the FBI's own history demonstrates is deliberate and strategic rather than a sign of stagnation. Investigators working a live case do not disclose the evidence they are developing because disclosure tells the subject what is known. The moment you reveal that you found a cell tower hit placing a device in the Catalina foothills on January 24th, the person who carried that device understands the extent of the digital trail against them and can begin constructing an explanation. Investigators who hold that information in silence leave the subject with no knowledge of what the case contains. That is the investigative advantage of apparent stillness. What looks like a dead end from the outside is often a case being built from the inside out, away from every camera and every press conference. In the same silence, the suspect reads as safety. The investigation is not mute, it is disciplined. And there is a difference between an investigation that has nothing to say and one that is choosing not to say it. There is a perception that has settled around this case over the past several weeks. The sense that the investigation has gone quiet, that the evidence has dried up, that the FBI and PCSD have run out of things to say because there is nothing meaningful left to work with. That perception is almost certainly exactly what the investigation wants. An abductor who believes his crime is perfect, who is watching the news and seeing nothing new, who is convinced the FBI has hit a dead end, is an abductor who relaxes. He stops being careful. He makes contact, spends money, talks to people, and makes the mistake that an investigation working silently has been waiting for him to make. The Golden State Killer parallel also carries a specific implication for how this investigation's internal posture should be read by the public. D'Angelo was arrested in 2018 only because investigators had spent years working a forensic genealogy approach that produced no press conferences, no public updates, and no indication that the case was progressing. The public, including D'Angelo himself, had no way to know how close the investigation had come. The arrest was the first public indication that anything significant had happened in the case for years. The Nancy Guthrie investigation is 75 days old, barely 2.5 months. The investigation of the Golden State Killer ran for over 4 decades before the arrest. 75 days of apparent quiet from an investigation with the FBI's full forensic capability. A $1 million reward generating tips and an active neighborhood canvas is not a case that has run out of steam. It is a case that is building. History has demonstrated this pattern repeatedly in cases the FBI eventually cracked. The most instructive example is the Golden State Killer, Joseph James D'Angelo, a retired police officer responsible for more than 50 violent crimes across California in the 1970s and 1980s. For decades, that case appeared cold. DNA had been collected, investigators had worked leads, and then for years, nothing publicly visible seemed to happen. D'Angelo went on with his life. He tended his garden. His neighbors described him as quiet and unremarkable. He had every reason to believe by the mid-2000s that he had gotten away with it. What he did not know was that investigators had been quietly working a forensic genealogy approach through GED match, building a family tree from his DNA, narrowing the universe of candidates for years before they had enough to move. When the arrest came in April 2018, it came suddenly and completely because the investigation had been building its case in silence the entire time D'Angelo thought he was free. The silence was the strategy. The arrest was the result. The significance of Nano saying, "We do believe," rather than "we have confirmed" or "we know," also reflects something about the state of the January 11th evidence. The FBI's digital forensic analysis produced a conclusion that something occurred. That conclusion is grounded in the analysis of equipment and digital data at NY's property, but Nanos's hedging on whether it can be stated definitively suggests the conclusion requires corroboration, either from external camera footage or from another source of evidence before the investigation considers it established beyond the operational belief stage. The neighborhood footage requests for January 11th and January 24th are the corroboration effort. Investigators found something in the digital evidence from NY's own property that pointed to those dates, and they are now trying to confirm what they found with external visual evidence from the surrounding neighborhood. The official belief is on record. The corroborating effort from the neighborhood is ongoing. Both facts are confirmed. What neither confirms yet is the specific activity, and that gap between the confirmed belief and the undisclosed finding is exactly where Day 78 sits. This investigation has the same architecture. The FBI does not return to a neighborhood 44 days into a case and ask about a specific date before the abduction because it has nothing to work with. It does not canvass for construction worker names because the evidence well is dry. It does not ask a neighbor about her internet service on the night of the abduction because it has exhausted every digital lead. Every one of those actions is the behavior of an investigation that is building quietly, methodically, without press conferences. A case that the suspect does not know is being constructed around him. The silence is not failure. In some investigations, the silence is the most dangerous thing the FBI can do to the person responsible. The physical discrepancy in the footwear between the two sets of images is also significant because it is the kind of detail that is easy to explain away if you are the suspect and you know investigators are looking at two images from the same night. If the images are from two different nights, the footwear discrepancy is simply the result of wearing different shoes on two different occasions. Unremarkable between visits, only notable when the images are assumed to be from the same night. The PCSD's denial that the images are from different dates is the official position. Anton sourcing says otherwise. The footwear discrepancy is the physical evidence in the public record that sits between those two positions without a resolution. Now to what Sheriff Nanos actually confirmed and what that confirmation means. On March 23rd, Nanos told Cole's news team, "We do believe that something occurred on January 11th, and that is with the FBI's analysis of the equipment and digital stuff they have done. We do believe that something occurred on the 11th, and that's with the FBI's analysis of the equipment and digital stuff they've done." That statement is the only official acknowledgement in the public record that a pre-abduction visit to NY's property occurred. He hedged his language carefully. He said, "We do believe," and he acknowledged he could not say so definitively, but the basis for the belief was FBI digital forensic analysis of equipment at the property. The FBI analyzed digital evidence from NY's own security equipment and concluded that something happened at that property on January 11th. That is 3 weeks before the abduction. The investigation does not build a forensic conclusion around a date 3 weeks prior to the crime, without that conclusion carrying real weight. The doorbell camera footage sits at the center of what the FBI found on January 11th. When the FBI released 2 sets of doorbell images publicly, analysts and community observers noticed something. In one set, the suspect was not carrying a backpack. In the set from the night of the abduction, he was carrying the Ozark Trail backpack confirmed by the FBI's own forensic description. Brian Anton went on record despite the sheriff pushing back with sourcing that one set of images was from a previous day and not from February 1st. The Puma County Sheriff's Department said in response that there was no date or timestamp associated with the images and that any suggestion they were taken on different days was purely speculative. That is the official denial on record. Anton's source remained on record regardless. Nancy Grace addressed the physical evidence of the discrepancy on crime stories on day 66 of the investigation, flagging that the suspect's footwear appeared different between the 2 sets of images, the kind of difference that happens between visits not within a single night's operation. Information about Miss Guthrie's whereabouts. This as we learn that there was a live feed of the outdoors in Mrs. Guthrie's kitchen and on a laptop. Is that real? Jennifer Coffin Daffer put the January 11th visit in terms that capture what it reveals about the suspect's commitment to this crime. She called it a trial run and said, "This tells us how committed Porch Guy was." Such a risky move. If he had been seen on the 11th, maybe Nancy would have never been taken. The weight of that observation is significant. This person came to NY's property 3 weeks before the abduction at night and walked away without being identified. He assessed the neighborhood's nighttime attention level and concluded that his presence at that property at that hour was manageable. He was right. Nobody called and nothing suspicious was reported to any authority. The neighborhood's lack of response to January 11th is the reason February 1st was possible. The security gate observation also reframes the suspect's behavior in the footage in a way that changes the operational profile the investigation is building. A suspect who was attempting to force entry through a front gate and failing is an improviser, someone who did not know the gate would be a problem and was problem-solving in real time. A suspect who was standing at the front looking through glass panels waiting for someone inside to bring the target out is an operator who knew the gate would be locked and had planned around it from the beginning. The reconnaissance visits on January 11th and January 24th would have revealed the security gate. A suspect who spent 2 Saturday nights surveilling this property knew it was there. His presence at the front door was not an improvisation. It was the planned position for the final stage of an operation that had been prepared across multiple visits over 3 weeks. What January 24th represents 8 days before the abduction, the Saturday immediately before he acted, is the final preparation visit. O'Connell's dry run framework places it precisely if January 11th was the first reconnaissance, January 24th was the final check. The suspect came back on January 24th to verify that the conditions he had observed 3 weeks earlier still held. The rear access point still had the vulnerabilities he had identified. The security camera was still in the same position. The neighborhood's nighttime quiet was still what he expected. He verified it all on January 24th, and 7 days later he returned with everything he needed to act on what he had learned. The progression from January 11th to January 24th to January 31st is not a random pattern. It is a preparation timeline. The Guthrie family's own statement adds a dimension to what the pre-surveillance dates represent to the people closest to this case. Savannah and her siblings released a statement asking the Tucson community to revisit memories, camera footage, journal entries, and personal observations connected to specific time frames, naming January 31st, the early hours of February 1st, and the late evening of January 11th. The family chose to name January 11th alongside the abduction date. That choice reflects communications with investigators close enough to give the family confidence that January 11th was a date the public should be thinking about. The Saturday pattern, the reconnaissance framework, and the family's own public statement all converge on the same picture. This crime was preceded by deliberate Saturday-specific preparation that the investigation has been systematically working to document from the neighborhood outward. There's a detail from Laura's interview with Entin that the broader coverage of this case has not given the weight it deserves, and it reframes everything about what the front door footage actually shows. NY's front door has a security gate, a heavy exterior gate with a lock that is standard across many properties in the Catalina foothills. Laura consulted a security professional about those gates in the weeks after the abduction. The assessment she received was specific. Those gates are not breakable. A person cannot force their way through that kind of security gate. She said it plainly to Entin. You are not getting through that gate. What that means for the footage is this. The suspect standing at NY's front door on February 1st was not trying to force entry. The gate prevented it. He was standing at the front door for a different reason. Laura watched the footage closely and said he was looking through the glass panels beside the door, trying to see what was happening inside. He was not looking for a way in. He was waiting for something to come out. Her theory, formed from a decade of living in that neighborhood and from her conversation with a security professional, is that there was already someone inside the property, an accomplice who had entered through the rear, where the back doors and gate had been propped open with flower pots and the rear floodlights smashed in advance, was already inside with Nancy. The person at the front was stationed there to receive her when she was brought out. The front door on that reading was the exit point, not the entry point. The cast team's work on this case also extends beyond the January dates into the night of the abduction itself. The 12 vehicles captured by ring cameras in the neighborhood between midnight and 6 o'clock a.m. on February 1st represent 12 potential cast leads, 12 plates, 12 device signatures, 12 movement histories that investigators can trace forward and backward in time. Cross-referencing the devices active in the neighborhood on the night of the abduction with devices active in the same neighborhood on January 11th and January 24th narrows the universe of candidates with a precision that physical descriptions cannot match. Any device that appears in all 3 windows without a legitimate residential explanation is a forensic signature that points toward the person who carried it. Whether CAST has produced such a match from the tower data and what that match has led to is information the investigation holds and has not publicly disclosed. Laura told Anon she had always assumed multiple people were involved. She described trying to help her own elderly mother who weighed around 120 kilos at the time. Even at that weight, moving someone who is not cooperating or cannot cooperate with the movement is physically demanding work. Nancy Guthrie's weight at the time of the abduction was reported at closer to 140 to 150 kilograms with significant mobility limitations. Moving her through a house, out a door, and into a staged vehicle is a task that strains the physical capacity of a single person operating under time pressure and the stress of an active crime. Laura said the thought that one person could manage that alone did not feel reasonable to her. Former FBI veteran Michael Biowell, separately analyzing the case, reached the same conclusion. 2 men would likely have been required to physically carry an 84-year-old woman with those mobility limitations out of her home. Steve Moore's framing of the construction worker inquiry is also worth examining in the context of the two-person theory Laura described. A construction worker who spent weeks operating in the neighborhood would have had legitimate observational access to NY's property from a distance. More significantly, a person working construction near that property would have had reason to be on foot in the neighborhood at varying hours, including early evenings, without it appearing unusual to residents who had grown accustomed to seeing work vehicles and crews in the area. The cover that legitimate neighborhood work provides, vehicles, tools, uniforms, and assumed reason to be present, is the same cover that allows close observation without generating the kind of alarm that a stranger visibly surveilling a residential property would produce. The construction worker inquiry is the investigation asking whether someone used that cover for a purpose that had nothing to do with construction. The two-person theory, if accurate, multiplies the significance of the pre-surveillance visits. Two people needed to know this property. Not just the front approach, but the rear. The specific entry points, the specific light positions, the path through the interior. That level of property-specific knowledge does not come from a drive-by and a real estate listing. It comes from close observation at night, close enough to identify which doors and which lights were the vulnerabilities. The January 11th and January 24th visits were the moments when that knowledge was gathered. By January 24th, whoever conducted those visits had a working operational map of Nancy Guthrie's property. 7 days later, that map was used. The digital evidence trail those visits would have left behind is where Heather Barnhart's cell tower analysis intersects directly with what O'Connell described as the dry run framework. Barnhart, a digital forensics expert who analyzed the case for Fox News Digital, asked a specific question about the pre-surveillance theory. If the person ever scoped out the house in advance, is there an unusual ping to towers? The FBI's CAS team, the Cellular Analysis Survey Team, was confirmed as active on this investigation. CAS processes cell tower data to reconstruct where specific devices were during defined time windows. If CAS processed the tower data for the neighborhood on all 3 Saturday nights and found the same device appearing in the same geographic area each time, that constitutes a forensic record of 3 separate visits by the same individual. Time-stamped and location-specific, not a theory. A time-stamped location-specific digital record from a device the suspect was carrying on his person during each visit. The camera footage is the visual record of the suspect's presence. The tower data is the electronic record. Together, they can produce a specific identification that neither source could produce alone. The broader neighborhood canvas that accompanied the January 24th footage request reveals how far the investigation extended its net. Brian Entin reported on March 17th that FBI agents were back in the neighborhood asking about houses under construction in the area and requesting the names of every contractor and worker who had been active on those construction projects in the weeks before February 1st. Former FBI agent Steve Moore addressed the logic of that request on Entin's podcast. He said, "The theory of this crime from the beginning has been that it was a targeted kidnapping, and to target someone you need to somehow come into contact with them. Workers on a construction project 2 streets from NY's property have a legitimate presence in the neighborhood. They observe. They see who lives where. They learn the area's patterns without drawing attention because their presence is expected. The investigation is asking whether someone who had legitimate daytime access to the neighborhood in a work context was using that access to gather the information a night operation would require." Laura also disclosed to Ent something she had personally reported to the FBI not long after the abduction. She had noticed that a rental property near NY's home had gone vacant within a few days before Nancy disappeared. The cars were gone. She confirmed the timing with neighbors. She called the FBI because she believed in seeing something and saying something. She did not want it to become hindsight. Entin's subsequent reporting confirmed the FBI was asking other neighbors about that same vacant property as well. A home that empties in the days immediately before a planned abduction in the same small neighborhood is the kind of timing investigators examine. Whether it connects to what happened or represents an unrelated departure is a determination the investigation is making internally. The billboards are part of the same widening picture. Electronic Finded Nancy Guthrie billboards were reported going up in Houston and in Southern California, not just in Arizona, not just in Tucson. The FBI announced those billboards in the early weeks of the investigation. Their geographic placement reflects where the investigation believes relevant information may exist. Houston and Southern California are not arbitrary choices. They are where investigators have reason to believe someone who knows something may be living or working. That geographic spread placed alongside the Saturday pattern and the possibility that the suspect traveled to Tucson on weekends from elsewhere produces a profile of someone whose primary base may not be in Arizona at all. On day 78, the FBI continues a detailed review of biological and DNA evidence collected from multiple locations connected to the case. Some of those samples do not match anyone in the National Criminal Database, requiring expanded forensic analysis and cross-state comparison efforts. No suspect has been named, no arrest has been made. Nanos has confirmed investigators believe they know the motive, but has declined to disclose it. Ransom notes continue to arrive at TMZ from a sender who has been in repeated contact throughout the investigation, most recently claiming the sender saw Nancy alive in Sonora, Mexico, then contradicting that in a second note. The investigation is moving forward. It is simply not moving loudly. The counter-evidence must be stated. The PCSD said any suggestion the doorbell images were from different dates was purely speculative, and that no date or timestamp was associated with those images. January 24th has not been officially confirmed by the FBI or PCSD in any public statement as a date of confirmed suspicious activity. Laura's cameras from January 24th produced nothing beyond wildlife. No person, no vehicle, no usable image. The footage request originally covered a full month from January 1st to February 2nd, not only specific dates. The shoe discrepancy noted by Nancy Grace could have explanations unrelated to different filming dates. No construction worker has been named or connected to the case. No arrest has been made on day 78. What has emerged is a picture of an abductor who came to this property 3 times before he acted. He knew exactly what he was walking into on February 1st because he had already been there twice. And he left a trail across 3 Saturday nights that the FBI has been quietly assembling since the first days of February. On day 78, that assembly is still ongoing. The answer to who did this to Nancy Guthrie already exists. In a neighbor's camera from January 24th, in cell tower data from that Saturday evening, or in the memory of someone who noticed a specific person was unavailable on those 3 weekends in January. It has existed since January. The investigation is working toward the moment when that answer becomes a name, a charge, and an arrest. The FBI sat with NY's neighbor for 25 minutes and searched her cameras for January 24th. Every confirmed date in this investigation is a Saturday. The same person who walked directly to NY's doorbell camera on February 1st with no hesitation, disabled it within seconds, and knew exactly where the rear access points were, had been there before. On day 78, what those previous visits produced in the neighborhood's cameras, in the cell tower data, and in the FBI's forensic file is the answer the investigation is holding, and $1 million is still waiting for whoever decides to speak first. Does the Saturday pattern change how you think about whether this suspect was local to Tucson or traveling specifically on weekends to conduct this operation? And based on what Laura said about the security gate, do you believe the person on the doorbell camera was the one who entered the house, or was he waiting at the front while someone else was already inside? Leave your answers below, like and subscribe. The combined reward in this case exceeds $1 million. 1-800-CALL-FBI and 520-35149, both anonymous.